Hello, Frostbite. Ryan Fox, Winter Camping Symposium, coming to you from a backcountry lake here on the border of the Boundary Waters Wilderness in the Superior National Forest here in Minnesota. Unfortunately, couldn't be with you guys this year. Obviously, due to COVID, we had to cancel our event as well, so was lucky enough to be able to bring you along on a trekking trip here and talk to you a little bit about hot tenting and winter camping. Hot tenting is the new coined phrase when it comes to winter campers or people with a heat source inside their tent. For many years we didn't really refer to it as hot tenting. We just kind of called it a wall tent probably, or a heated shelter. But they come in many forms. So hot tents come in many forms. They come in nylon product. They come in canvas product. They come in a hybrid of both. A teepee is a hot tent if you put a fire in it. Many Arctic shelters that run alcohol stoves or diesel drip stoves are hot tents. So here in back we've got set up some more traditional style tents. They're running wood stoves. One is canvas and one is nylon. First thing we want to talk about when kind of getting into hot tenting is safety. And when traveling in the winter, the number one safety concern is going to be moisture management, and that is how much moisture is your body producing during the day, given your activity level, and then what's your opportunity to dry yourself out as well as the clothing that you're wearing. It's currently about 8 degrees Fahrenheit here, so this is about perfect weather to talk about this. If you're snowshoeing during the day, hauling a toboggan, cutting wood, you're working up a large amount of warmth. You're producing sweat, so if you're not conscious about layering down and layering up, your skin will be wet and you will be cold. Granted, the hot tent helps alleviate some of that, but you still want to be very conscious of that. Running a wood stove in a hot tent comes with its own set of rules, in my mind, safety rules for sure. Number one is make sure your stove is set up properly and that you know how to run it. Make sure the pipe is secure, the stove legs are secure, that all of the working parts of that stove work, and that you know how it operates and know how to operate that efficiently. You also need to know how to run the tools that are going to produce the fuel for your wood stove. So that could be an axe, a saw of some sort, and a knife. You should be fairly proficient in those tools, and you should also know how to handle a wound from one of those tools if you take one. Processing wood, in my mind, is one of the top concerns for safety, especially in the backcountry where you're far away from services. The last thing you need is a saw or an axe wound, especially when you're powered by your own feet coming in here. So safety concerns aside, the enjoyment for myself in hot tenting is that it extends my outdoor experience, right? I've got another 4 or 5 months throughout the winter that I can travel the backcountry and enjoy nature and be at one with myself out there, and it really extends that to the point where it becomes very comfortable. I spent plenty of time in a backpacking tent in the winter, under a tarp, with a long fire, no fire at all, fairly uncomfortable. Got pretty good at suffering. As I've gotten older, and what I've realized is I'm willing to transfer that weight off of my back, put it on a toboggan and be more comfortable. So I can be more active during the day. I can come back and basically be in a dryer. All my stuff can be dry. I can cook over that wood stove. So there are a lot of benefits to me there. It also extends the length of my stay. So instead of maybe 3 or 4 days out there and then feeling like I'm fairly uncomfortable, now you can extend that to weeks or months or years, or a lifestyle, certainly as the traditional peoples travel. So most of the idea of hot tenting comes out of the First Nations and the traditional people here, the native people in North America, specifically the Cree and the Ojibwe, were traveling by snowshoe and toboggan. And in later years, when iron was popular, they were running cast iron stoves like the trappers would. So the history is coming out of there, and now it's become more of a modern take on a traditional way to travel. First time campers, winter campers that get into hot tenting, my biggest suggestion would be to rent a tent or a stove, or borrow a tent and stove, or go with a friend that has a tent and a stove, and go locally. What I mean by locally is go to a local state park or provincial park. Go to somewhere where the vehicle's close, where you can just take the stuff out of the back of your trunk, set it up in the backyard. Test that wood stove. See how hot you can get it. See when it starts to get cold. All of these things are good suggestions to test out, because the last thing you want is to be 10 below zero and not knowing how that stove and that tent are going to perform in that cold of weather. So I would suggest doing that. That would be the first thing I would do. Second thing I would do would be seriously invest in a good sleep system. I'm out here with my son right now, and I think it got down to 3 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Fahrenheit last night, but we sleep cold. We don't run the stove at night. I believe you should always be prepared to sleep cold. If you want to run the stove at night, that's certainly your choice. I don't see anything against that. Personally, I prefer that 6 to 8 hours of solid sleep, not having to wake up and stoke the wood stove. Then if I also have a wood stove failure, I can sleep in a snowbank and know that I've got more than enough insulation to keep me warm. So as we move on to looking at how we travel when we hot tent, that also comes in many forms, just like the style of tents and the way that people use them. So there's plenty of people that use their vehicle. So they're pulling into a state park or a camping spot. They're taking out all of their equipment and setting it up right there. Maybe they're even hauling some firewood in. Certainly a great way to experience the winter. Another way would be by a snow machine, pulling a Comatic or a large sled. And then the third style, which is what my son and I are doing now, which is we're walking in by boot. There's not enough snow for snowshoes, but walking in by boot, pulling traditional style toboggans with all of our equipment loaded on that, and then setting up from there. So those are kind of the styles and modes of travel that most people use when moving those hot tents around. Traditionally, and for the most part, hot tents are fairly bulky, and so are wood stoves. So you have to accommodate for that. There are some products on the market that allow you to put them in the backpack. These are a nylon tent with like a titanium foldable or collapsible stove. These are very lightweight. They will keep you warm. I would say that they're not for long-lasting stays in the wilderness, in my opinion. So as we look at the way that hot tenting can increase our experience in the outdoors, for me, I can speak personally and say that the length of stay is equal to the quality of time that I spend out here in the wilderness. So if I can spend a week, 2 weeks, 4 days, whatever it's going to be, that time is very important to me, and the more time that I can spend out here, the better. I feel refreshed, I feel connected, and when I go back to my family and my job and my friends and my coworkers, I seem to have a better mood and a better outlook on what I'm doing, and I certainly am more productive after a good long stay in the wilderness. So that's a good overview. Why don't we talk just a little bit about frequently asked questions from newcomers when talking about hot tenting, and then we'll step over and take a look at our campsite and take a look at some of our gear. Most of the questions I get are surrounding firewood, number one. So it's how to select it and how to find it. For us, we're on the very southern edge of the boreal forest here, so we generally have a good mix of spruce, pine, and then in our swamp areas, we've got a mix of birch, popple, aspen, and ash, mostly. So for here, for us up here, it's fairly easy to find firewood. The woods are dense. There's a lot of down wood. There's a lot of standing dead wood. I always will look at spruce and pine first. For me, they're the easiest to see what's dry and what's dead. When you're looking at, let's use a pine tree, for example, or conifer species. If you've got a tree that's standing and the bark is almost completely off and there are no needles on it, that's a good sign that that tree is dead and it's probably going to burn hot. Another couple secondary things that I do to check moisture is I knock on that tree with the back of my axe. there's a hollow, dry sound that comes out of a tree as opposed to one that's soaking wet or rotten. If you hit that tree and your axe head goes into it, it's probably rotten. If it thuds with a nice dry thud, well, you're in pretty good shape. The other method I use is I take a sliver off that tree or a small shaving with my axe or knife, and I stick that piece to my tongue. If that piece sticks, like a piece of testing paper or litmus paper, then I know that that wood is dry. If it slides off my tongue, then there's a very good chance that there's moisture in that wood. If you see a tree that's standing that's dead, but it's got a broken top, that can be iffy. A lot of the times that tree will take moisture in through its broken top and could be rotten halfway down. And I think wood selection is so important really for two reasons. One is you want to be warm. You want to be burning dry wood, and that's what's going to make that stove perform at its peak optimum performance. Second is it's a lot of energy to cut a tree down. So if you put out a bunch of energy to cut down a tree that's soaking wet, you've just wasted all that energy. Outside of staying warm while you're cutting and processing the wood, that's one thing, but then to end up with a pile of semi-burnable wood or wood that's going to smolder in the wood stove seems like a total waste of time. So when looking at wood, you want to have dry wood, right? You want to have dry, splittable wood. I would tend to stay away from birch, popple, softer woods like that, woods that traditionally grow in wetlands. They tend to rot quicker. Ash is a great resource, obvious to find when it's dead. It grays out, and there's no limbs left on it, and you can generally just push them over. Great firewood. So I would say test some wood. In your backyard, cut a piece of green wood, see what it feels like, see what it looks like, see what it sounds like, see what it tastes like. Cut a piece of dry wood and do the same. Do that at home so you have an understanding of what's dry and what's wet, and that'll lead you to better chances finding good wood in the wilderness. Now, the second most frequently asked question is, where do I camp? Well, down here in the States, we have a huge amount of public land. We're lucky enough to have a huge amount of public land. So down here, national forests, state forests, they're all open to free-range camping. You can walk back. A lot's not accessible by vehicle, maybe by snow machine, but certainly there are places to camp there. There are some parks that are open in winter to camping. Here in Minnesota, we have a few, and a few I mean like 4 or 5 maybe. In other parts of the country, there are certain areas that are open for winter. So you got to make some phone calls, do some checking. And I would suggest getting on the internet and going through the forums and getting on the Facebook pages and asking people. What you'll find, for the most part, is winter campers are generally a very sharing group and are very open to offering suggestions and places to camp. So outside of those two things, most of the questions that I get focus around gear because we're fairly gear focused when we're looking at hot tenting. So let's take a minute. We'll walk up to our camp here and take a look at some gear. Well, here we are at our campsite. On this trip, we're camped on land. We do camp on the ice typically, but this early in the season, while the ice is still forming, it's best if you can find a campsite on land. We've ended up with a great flat spot here. This is our wood yard, so I typically like to keep all my cutting tools and all my wood processing away from the tents. We keep our toboggans out here as well. And so this is where we'll bring in the load of cut wood, typically cut it in the woods, and then haul it to here in length, split it here, and then put it into each of the tents. We lean our toboggans up at night so we don't get frost accumulation on the bottom side for pulling on the next day. Let's take a look at some of the tents we got set up here. So this first tent is a 100% nylon tent that a dear friend of mine made for me, and it's approximately 9 by 9 by about 5.5 feet tall at the center peak. It's got 2 doors, one on this side and one on the wood stove side. Let's take a look inside the tent. So here we've got a partial floor in this tent. Again, this is set up for trekking, so it's pretty lightweight. We've got an old footprint from an old summer tent that I had. It's nylon there for a waterproof barrier. We've got a wool blanket on top of that. For the sleep system in this one, we've got a accordion style foam pad covered by a typical thermarest.
and then that's got a double down bag system. That's a 10-degree bag, and then inside there's another 20-degree down bag, so that's plenty good to zero and below. On the right-hand side, we've got a Nico stove. That's the smallest model that they make. It is more than enough to heat this tent and dry everything out. You can see we don't have much snow here, so don't need a real full floor. Again, very lightweight. This tent, being that it's nylon, holds a fair amount of moisture. It doesn't breathe like canvas, so my friend put in a bunch of vents at the top of the roof. There are several vents throughout, but a big, large triangle vent helps alleviate the moisture because the tent doesn't breathe once the doors are closed. Other than that, bunch of gear storage on the outside. It is freestanding. It's got aluminum poles, so you put the poles in and you can move the tent around before you peg it down. It's got tie-outs on the outside for wind and snow load, and it's got a snow skirt on the bottom so you can bury it all the way around if it's really windy out. So overall, a really lightweight tent and a great option for solo travel. It's been, I think I've had this one 4 or 5 years, and it's served me well on many trips. Here we are at our other setup here. This is a Snow Trekker canvas 8x10 short wall. So the 8x10 speaks to the footprint, the bottom layout. This is about 6 feet tall at the peak. Snow Trekker's got all the specs on there for you. This is a great 2-person traveling shelter or trekking shelter. If you're going to put this on a toboggan and you're going to be moving more than one night, this is a great shelter for 2. It is luxurious for 1. There's 2 of us staying in here now. The most common question I get about this style of tent and this setup is, how do you attach your stovepipe? So traditionally you'd see 2 sticks holding the pipe up. I've moved to this system where I've drilled 3 holes through 2 pieces of pipe that connect them, and I use these eyelets and these little carabiners that go to strings. These strings attach down to where my tent is staked out in the ground as well as to the peak, and that presents a really stable, lightweight support. I don't need to look for branches and cut branches. I don't need to have all this other guy wire out. This has worked very well for me. I've been using this for the last couple years, and it seems to work really well. Let's take a look inside the Snow Trekker here. Okay, so what we have in this tent, again, is an 8x10. The floor system in this tent is a full floor. It's a Snow Trekker floor, so it's the blue truck tarp material. I believe they come in black now. And it's got snow or ice house fabric sewn onto the top of it. So it's very heavy, but it is 100% waterproof and very reliable. Down here in the States, we can't cut live boughs, so we need to haul our floors in. This tent is powered by a 4-dog titanium wood stove. It's got a secondary baffling system in the pipe that Don at 4-Dog made for me. It's kind of like a mini rocket stove attached to the wood stove, so it allows me to dampen it down without a baffle in the stove and push more heat into the tent. We have these accordion-style foam pads on the ground. I find those very useful. They're super lightweight. They take up a bunch of square footage on the floor. They add a lot of insulation value, and they're great protectant for your sleep system. Usually carry 1 box, and that box is all of our food, cookware, personal gear, lighting equipment, things of that nature. On the back wall, I've got a Xped sleep pad system that's got a chair kit, so it's in a chair mode right now, but that lays flat along that blue pad, so that's where I would sleep. Up at the peak, we've got some of the things air drying out. I suggest attaching things to the peak of your tent. That's where the hottest point of the tent is. Stuff's going to dry out super fast up there. Over on the right-hand side of the tent, we've got my sleep roll that's kind of balled up in the corner there. We've got a foldable chair here, and along this right side is where my son has his sleep system. Last night, anyways. I think he's going to stay in the solo shelter tonight. But that's the kind of the basic layout for trekking. You notice we don't have cots. We don't have a lot of extra things. I've got some small LED lights up top. We have our headlamps. We're trying to keep the weight down, so this is a pretty minimalistic setup in here. I've had this tent for 5 or 6 years. It's worked very well. It's seen a lot of nights in the wilderness. It breathes really well, so you can walk in here soaking wet, fire up that wood stove, and you'll be dry in no time. The natural light that comes through this canvas during the day is a beautiful thing, and they sure do glow a beautiful glow by candlelight in the evening. So that's my basic setup for the Snow Trekker tent. All right, now that we've talked about the tents and we've looked through those and we kind of have a basic understanding of how a wood stove works and how a heated shelter works, let's talk a little bit about what I prefer to bring on almost all of my trips. So I generally bring a grouping of bags, and these are waterproof nylon bags, and in here I've got them clearly marked first aid kit. I choose red, obviously, for first aid. A repair bag, so this is going to have a bunch of tenacious tape, wire, patching for fabric, leather, sewing material, other things like that. I always have a toilet paper or go to the bathroom bag. In here I've got 2 rolls, half rolls of toilet paper, some wet wipes, hand sanitizer, and I keep that in a 100% waterproof bag with a handle, and here's a rope bag. So I guess what I'm saying is I like to be organized. I like to keep them in bags. These 4 bags certainly make it on every single trip that I go on. I carry 2 knives with me. One is I carry a Puko style belt knife. It's not large, it's not full tang. I'm not asking it to do a large knife's work. So this is what I prefer. I love the way it feels in the hand. The blade size is just right for me. I prefer a belt sheath. I like it on the belt so that it's sturdy and right there. I do carry a small neck knife. This is a paring knife, a very typical plastic handled thin blade paring knife in a sheath, a Kydex sheath here that's meant to go around your neck. I use this knife 90% of the time while in camp. This does all my in-tent chores, cutting rope, cutting food, any number of those types of chores. You'd be surprised at what you can do with this small of a knife. Moving over to tools, I generally carry 1 axe and not 2. I brought in 2 here for an example. This first is a Grand First Bruck forest axe, small forest axe. It's a very popular axe. It does a number of things very well. It's great for limbing. It's great for bushcraft, building things, carving. You can choke up on it. It's lightweight. What it's not good for, in my opinion, is winter camping. Winter camping, I'm going to prefer a larger axe. This is a boy style axe. This is a no-name head, an old refurbished carbon axe head with a longer handle, a beefier handle on it. It's probably about a 2¼ pound head, a little heavier head, 2.5 pound head. And this is going to do more work. And the majority of the work that I'm going to do with this axe is splitting. There's some limbing, but majority is going to be splitting, maybe pounding in some tent stakes potentially in the back. So this is the style of axe that I prefer to bring. This is the one that happened to make it on this trip. So another axe that we happen to have on this trip that I don't carry generally, but brought it as an example, is a hatchet, or this is a carpenter's axe, or a small axe. This is fairly useless when processing wood for a wood stove. I'm not building shelters. I'm not making anything out here. I'm bringing all that gear with me. So for me personally, I find something of this size or this style, while useful in its own right, not very useful again in winter camping. We're talking about processing larger amounts of wood, bigger wood, so we need bigger tools to do that work. I like to carry a 30-inch collapsible saw. This is a Bob Doostrud model. It's got a raker tooth style, coarse cut style blade on it for cutting dry wood. It works really well. The 30-inch size is great. More blade, more wood, more length of stroke, less strokes, etc. It's about efficiency of the tool. Again, this is going to be a lot of work, so you want to make that work the easiest that you can. So that's what I prefer to carry. And And again, it's all about preference and the type of wood you're harvesting. If you're looking at all hardwoods, maybe you're looking at even a bigger axe, maybe a different type of saw, or if you're going to be crafting or building something, maybe you are choosing something like the forest axe over this larger axe. So that's kind of an overview of some of the tools I bring and some of the equipment that I bring with me, all of which is important. Certainly want to keep everything maintained and again be proficient in its use. So thank you. All right, well, we're back out on the lake and we're going to talk about hot tenting and winter clothing that we're going to wear when we're hot tenting. So let's start with what I'm wearing currently. I'm wearing a ball cap primarily because I'm losing my hair and because it's sunny out. I'm also wearing sunglasses because not only the sun, but because we're traveling on this white snow. We've got ice, we've got snow all over the trees, and you definitely can get snow blindness, so I would recommend a decent set of shades, and I prefer a keeper like this, so you make sure that you don't lose them. Underneath, I'm wearing a sturdy wool sock. I prefer darn tough. Some merino long underwear, top and bottom. I've got a heavy-duty wool pant on. I've got a lightweight wool shirt on. And I've got an Empire woolen canvas vest on. Now, this is typically what I would wear on my body while working or trekking, pulling toboggan across lakes and portages and such. On my feet, I'm wearing a traditional style. This is a Steger muckluck. It's got a wool boot inside and some lining material on the bottom. Again, that's what I'm wearing when I'm tripping. I have another set that I keep in camp, so I'll switch them out when I get into camp so I can always have one drying and always be wearing a dry set. I'll also switch my socks when I get to camp and dry those out. I have a separate set of socks that I sleep in also. Got some other clothing here that I typically wear. This is my parka. This is a lightweight canvas, breathable parka. Another Empire canvas works with a fur ruff. This absolutely will shed the wind. It'll also pull moisture away from your inner layers. And the ruff is an absolute must when traveling in sub-zero weather. It pulls all that frost away from your face and kind of creates this little microclimate right in front of your face. So an invaluable piece of clothing kit. My son's parka, again by Empire. This is a set of True North Empire mitts. These are my son's. This is a big leather palm mitt with a large gauntlet cuff. It's got a wool liner on the inside. Very warm. The liners are removable. These are my mitts that I'm currently running. It's an OR, so it's a nylon over mitt. Again, a large gauntlet cuff with a wool removable liner on the inside. This is attached to a thong, a braided thong that I made just so I can wear them around my neck and tie them around my back when not in use. I always carry a Mad Bomber style hat, something with ear flaps. On a real cold night, I'll wear this to bed and pull the visor down over my face to keep my eyes warm. But this is a hat that always rides along with me. Always carry a sash too. This is from my friends over at Lure of the North. A sash to tie around the bottom of my parka or anorak to keep that warmth inside or loosen it to let the heat out as I'm traveling or working. And then I also always carry a bag of some sort, a backpack, a small satchel bag. This happens to be a Frost River lumbar pack. I think they call it the Back Bay. It's a wax canvas, but in here has all of my daily stuff. So fire starting material, extra rope, another small first aid kit, extra light, an extra knife. I'll put my snacks in there for the day. It'll hold water bottles. So that's something that I bring on every hot tent trip. So other than that, I would say a standard set of insulated leather gloves are going to be your best friend. These have got some lining on the inside, but otherwise a pretty durable glove. These are probably the gloves, the handwear that I absolutely wear the most. But for you and where you're traveling, you're going to have to cater what you wear to what you're doing and how you're traveling. The only thing that I don't have here that I also do bring is a fairly thick, large down coat, and that is the coat that I put on when I stop. If we're in the middle of a lake and I'm taking a lunch break, that thing goes on. Right when I get to camp, that thing goes on. If I'm running up to use the bathroom, that thing goes on. So I'm not working in it. I'm not traveling in it. I'm not snowshoeing in it. I'm using it for the sedentary times where I'm not moving much and not expelling a lot of energy. So that about covers the clothing. Hey everyone, just back from the woods and drying all my stuff out and back in my office here planning for the next trip. So just wanted to thank you all for joining me. Hope you got a lot out of this class. I know I'm no videographer, but hope it translated to you. And thanks to David and Brian for having me for Frostbite, and hope to see you guys next year. Please find me on the Winter Camping Symposium forum, and see you out there.